Hey everyone, so open Blender, hit escape, zoom out with your scroll wheel, hit B for box select, click and drag from a corner all the way down, hit X, and then click delete. So this is the 3D viewport. This is where you do your modeling and animating, and the main purpose of Blender is found here. So what you need to know is that Blender is a bunch of these different viewports, and you do specific stuff in each one of them. And each time you kind of open and do stuff in one, it does kind of stick around in the background, even when you kind of choose to a different one. So it's a good idea to keep these spaces clean wherever possible and kind of delete stuff if you don't need it. So we're going to go to video editing here. And the main things you'll get from this video that you might not get from others are timecodes and the audio issues in Blender, and why you may or may not want to use audio at all in Blender. So I'll put timestamps to those specific issues, but just you should know about those two things because you can run into some really major issues there. So if you know everything else, just skip to those two. So basically we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different viewports in the VSE upon start here. And these 3 here are actually the same thing. They're all the video sequence editor viewport here. And you can kind of switch between views here to go back and forth between the 3 of them. So the first thing you need to know is these buttons here. These are all specific to each of the viewports, but they all do the exact same thing. They're all, the exact same. They have different pictures, they're different sizes, they're in different locations, but they all basically allow you to change viewports in the existing one here. And you can move these around, customize however you want. Just go for the corners here. Click and drag around like so. So even the file viewport has its own specific uses there. And this is the info one here. So if you ever close that, it's just the info one. So to make new viewports, what you do is you look for this little thing here. They're on each one of the viewports. Just click and drag away from the corner of it, and you'll make a duplicate, and you can keep doing that as soon as you release. If you go the other route though, so click and drag into the corner, you get this little arrow here, and it allows you to collapse in the direction that you want to. So we're going to delete what we just made there. If you do it by accident, instead of releasing here, what you want to do is just move your mouse down and then release to not get rid of anything. So we're just going to get rid of that. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is look at the Properties tab here. So we're going to take our graph editor and go to Properties here. So by default, this is on Image Editor. Just keep it there until you fully understand what it does. It basically shows you what happens when it renders. It allows you to check to make sure your render is rendering correctly. And it allows you to use the F12 command to take a snapshot and then see that. And then you can use that for masking to easily mask and all that stuff. So it's best just to keep it on. I know some people say to optimize your session just to have it on Keep UI, but you lose so much functionality, and I don't even notice any difference in optimizing by having it off. So just keep it on. So by default we're set to 1080p here, our resolution, and this is set to 50% by default. We want it to be 100% most of the time when we render. If you want to do like a lossy render to see what it looks like, you can choose 50% or 25% or whatever, depending on if your container and codecs allow you to do that or not. The FPS is 24 by default. Just pay attention to that. We're going to revisit that. If you go down here, the output, you specify where you want to save it. You can just hit escape when you get into this tab to get out of it quickly. So the important thing with the output is just to include the file extension. So if it's a .avi, just include .avi. If it's a Matroska container, .mkv, etc. If you don't do that, what can happen is you get a .fil file, and you have to go into Windows and specify in Control Panel that you want to see the extension. Then you just rename it and add your extension that you need. If you don't do that, the FPS might get screwed up and it won't recognize it immediately what it is. So if it's a video file, and you have to tell it it's a video file and open with a specific program and all that stuff, it's a hassle. So the other route is just to click here, and it just automatically puts the file extension, and you're safe if you do that. So if you want a video, you go to FFmpeg here generally, and you click on encoding, and you got 3 options here. You have a container, and you have 2 codecs, an audio and video codec. So generally the container specifies which of the codecs you can or can't use. Matroska and ABI allow the lossless codecs here. So Matroska allows the most kind of different combinations basically, and it's the safest one generally. But in terms of support, ABI is a bit older and has maybe a bit more support with a lot of players out there. But it does have some issues, like it has a 2 GB limit with certain players, older players for example. But for the most part, you'll be safe with Matroska if you just choose that. So the codec H.264 is generally what you want if you want to upload to YouTube or most, internet sites. And most purposes you want H.264. There's some other ones here you might want to use like MPEG-4, but pretty much H.264 is what it'll do pretty well. So the output quality here. Lossless generally means that whatever you input, like if I put a video in here and I rendered it back out and I chose lossless, I'd get pretty much what I had input to begin with. So that's kind of what lossless is. Every time you render, Blender does re-encode. So, some video editors have, a way of not re-encoding, but Blender every single time it re-encodes, and every time you re-encode, you're going to lose something, or something's going to be different, basically. Just keep note of that. The encoding speed, I just go very slow because I don't notice a difference in speed at all. But I do notice a huge difference in file size, so it's very slow generally. And then the audio codec. So you have 3 options in my opinion: PCM, FLAC, or AAC. For some reason PCM sounds very, very bad for me. So generally I opt for AAC whenever I use this, whenever I render audio this way anyways. So AAC is your lossy format, and it's generally okay if you do a high bitrate or do whatever bitrate your audio is in if you know it. Otherwise, just choose the highest here. And with FLAC, I haven't properly tested it yet because originally it was the audio was mute when I rendered it out. It turns out it's just a VLC player that was not playing it correctly. And that's kind of the thing. You need to check that these settings are respected after you render, because you can get tons of bugs and everything like that. Like if I render this with a Matroska container, even though my FPS is set to 24, it's going to upscale to 1000. And that's a bug specific to my system, which I don't, I have no idea why it happens, but it just does. So you need to kind of just be vigilant and check these things. So the best way to check is to download the FFmpeg kind of suite, and there's a program called FFplay, and you can, if you type the command, I'll put the command in the description here, and a video on how to use it type thing, but you can easily check to make sure things are actually rendered properly that way. It's the best way to check, and generally if you upload to YouTube or whatever, you will get what you get in FFplay compared to what you get in VLC player, which may or may not be correct. Like VLC player, isn't always correct. And what it's showing you, that's the thing you kind of need to understand here, as great as it is. And you might need to upgrade your VLC player with different plugins or whatever to make sure it's playing things correctly. AAC is probably pretty safe, but PCM is like the .wab. It sounds very bad, but just play around with those 3, see what works best for you. So we're going to go back up here and talk about 2 other things. So the render, you basically click animation here, and it starts a process that you can't interrupt without stopping the entire thing. So just pay attention to that. You can't stop and then resume or anything like that. You have to let it render the entire thing from start to finish. But you can easily just hit escape and redo it later. But rendering takes a long time because it's a single core or single thread process or something like that with Blender. So it's just a very long render times when you use Blender, so just pay attention to that. You can go up here to audio and click that. This allows you to render out just the audio. And if you do that, you want to set this to 1, I find, generally. It just captures it most accurately. And for the most part, I would, if you're mixing down more than one track, like you have audio layered on each other, you want to use WAV F32, I find. And that's pretty much all I'm going to say on that. When you hit Mixdown though, what's going to happen is it's going to freeze Blender usually. And you just don't do anything. You can just minimize Blender by clicking here and do something else if you want while you wait. But Blender is actually mixing stuff down. It just takes a while and it freezes itself up. Sometimes even Windows hits, says it stopped working. Do you want to close it? Just don't click anything. And one time it even said it shut it down and it wanted me to confirm, which I didn't confirm. And what happened was it finished the mix down and then Blender kind of just shut itself down at the end after it had finished. And you can just easily reboot it if you have your restore settings configured, which is really important, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So just hit escape or cancel there. So next thing we're going to do is go down to the timeline here, and how do you move around it? So you can use your scroll wheel to zoom in, zoom out. You can click the middle mouse button and move your mouse to pan. Then the other one is control plus pan. So control, holding it, plus your middle mouse button down, plus moving your mouse around. And you use those three in conjunction with each other to navigate this, and you can see as many strips as you want, basically, see what you need to see. So the thing you need to know about Blender is that one limitation is that it's only 32 channels here. And we're going to input a video right now. So to input a video, you can just click and drag it down onto the timeline here from your file folder. That's generally the fastest way. And when using a VSE, knowing how to do something is important, but knowing how to do it fast is equally important. So you need to kind of maximize your workflow and try and do things as quickly as possible here, just so you don't get bogged down. So I'm going to teach you how to do things the fastest way wherever possible here, because there's multiple ways of doing things. So the other way would be Shift A and then movie, and then you can just click on the movie here. This is useful if you want to open a bunch of images and make like an image strip. So an image strip of like 100, or in this case from 1 to 251, an image strip of 251 images would fit, from here to here, and it would just be one solid strip. So that's a very useful way of inputting strips like that. They generally have to be numbered. So if I rendered out an image here, it would be numbered based on the number it is in correspondence to, the timeline here. What we want to do, so as we see, we have a preview window here, and two things actually change when we input the video. And we're going to talk about those in a minute. But to move your strips around here, we have an audio strip and a video strip. To move the video strip, it's you can hit G while you select it with right click here, and that automatically allows you to move it around. Then just left click wherever you want it. To undo that, it's Control Z. To redo, it's Control Shift Z. And the other one is G, and then you can specify direction by hitting Y afterwards, or just X next. So after you have G, you can just toggle between Y and X at any time. The next one is just some useful things. So if I want to move this to the green timeline bar here, and to move that, you just click with the left click here, and you can drag it. You can just click any point, it'll move there. So to snap this to that, it's just have it highlighted, then hit Shift S. And then the other one, if I want to line this up with that, I can hit G here, and I can just try and do it like that way. But the easiest way is hold Control, and while you move your mouse around, while you hit Control, it'll actually snap the points of interest. So it's an easy way to line things up. So we're going to talk about the FPS next. So as you can see, it changed from 24 to 23.81. And this actually has a bunch of decimal places that it is respecting, just it's not showing them in this case. So it's 5 divided by 0.21 is equal to this number here with all the decimal places. With Blender, the effect strips will only recognize 3 decimal places, and you deal with these down here. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But other things, like this, they only show 2 decimal places, but they actually have a whole bunch of them that they're respecting here. So just little things like that to note. But what happens is the first video you input sets the FPS for your entire project here. And so it's important to kind of maintain the same FPS throughout, or you come up with an issue here. What you want to look for is that the audio strip and the video strip line up. And that's one of the things you want to look for each time you insert a video of any kind into your timeline here. If they line up, great. You don't have any issues you have to deal with. But what happens if we put a 30 FPS video, for example? So I click and drag that in. It's going to zoom out here. So as you can see, these two don't line up. So if I played, any of this, basically, the audio would stop around here, and I have, blank space, no audio here. And so obviously everything would be out of sync between the audio and the video extremely quickly here. So to fix this, and there is a fix for this, if you click the video strip, hit Shift A, go to Effect Strip and Speed Control, you get a modification strip here. And you just make sure you have a speed control selected and go over here, scroll down, unclick that, go to 1.26 here as your input speed. So this is 1.2 times the original speed here. And what this does is it allows it to get, it basically ends the video around here as opposed to here. So I'll just mute this with the H command here to show you. So it normally ended around here, right? But with that, it ended around here. So it's fairly close to the audio strip in this case. And you can zoom out from here by using your scroll wheel again. It's fairly close. I can probably use this and line it up fairly well, or okay-ish, I guess, and use it in conjunction with, these to make a video. So the thing you usually want to be ideal is to have the new FPS. It's basically 30 FPS divided by the existing workspace. So your new FPS, whatever it may be, 30 in this case, divided by the workspace FPS, which is 23.81 something, and rounded to a third decimal place here, which is about 1.26 here. And so by doing that calculation and speed control, you can line things up fairly close. The ideal is to get it, within 3 decimal places exactly, in which case it would line up exactly here. But sometimes when you're dealing with, decimals like, crazy decimals, you can't do that. So, you might want to consider changing the FPS later on here of your first video, just to make it, able to line the other videos that you may or may not need up properly, and you can play around and mix and match them without, sync issues. But next thing we're going to talk about here, I'm going to delete this quickly. So hit B for box select again, click and drag down, then hit X and then delete. So let's just talk about this here. This is a play area, so it plays from here to here all the time, and it just repeats itself all the time. So to expand this, we can zoom out and we go over here. Let's just make a large work area here, just for the heck of it. So go down to your mini timeline here, hit E for end, and the opposite is S, and just kind of watch here for a second. So this actually here is matching up with this here, and this here is telling you where you want to render from. So in this case I want to render from here to here, so it's going to make a video from here to there basically in that kind of length, so like 37 minutes basically. So if these don't match up, it's because you press this button here. Generally, if something that was working isn't working anymore, it's because you press the button somewhere here or here. Again, these are repeated, so you got 3 times as many chances to hit the wrong button here. So with Blender, what happens is it's got 32 channels here, and it's a top-down kind of view, and you can't fill the bottom 0 channel, so it's always blank there, and you can run out of space very quickly here. If you highlight both strips here with the box select and hit Shift D, you can duplicate them. And so, I can have 32 of these in total here, lined up to the top, and I'll just show you where the top is, for example. It's about here. And if you run out of space, you're kind of in a bit of a you're going to run into issues with space generally in Blender, in my opinion anyways, when you do any kind of major editing, that is anyways. So we're going to talk about if you click on a strip, it brings up this window again, and to toggle that window it's just N. Hit N again and again and again, and we're going to talk about the first major thing here. So proxies and timecodes, mainly timecodes. So scroll down here, click here. For timecode, hit record run, and then just rebuild proxy timecode. And it starts a process that can take a while depending on how big your file is. So generally you can just minimize this and do something else and kind of make note that it might take a while. So what do we do there? So we inserted a proxy and a timecode here. So basically you want to keep this 25% usually and build JPEG quality. So a proxy is basically a dummy video of the existing one that overlays over top and makes like a JPEG of every single frame here. You can use your arrow keys on your keyboard to go frame by frame. A video is just a bunch of different frames. So it's making a JPEG image of every single frame here of this quality here. So it's making it 25% of the original resolution. So 25% of the original amount of pixels, which is, the 1080p thing here. And then it's displaying a JPEG of a certain quality here. Generally, you can get away with 80% here or 70%, depending on how big your project is going to be and what your computer stats are. You can kind of play around with this to pick a setting that works for you. I generally go 80% if I have a big project, like 3 minutes or longer type thing. You can go down to 1 if you want to. It's kind of hard to see. 100 is very redundant, so I don't wouldn't recommend that. I just keep 90 maximum generally. So the important thing is timecode here, or the major important thing is timecode. So what timecode does is, say let's find the scene change here. So we have this frame here, then the next frame is black space here. Say I wanted to add a lip dub here, or a lip flap here, open her mouth here. So I do that as an overlay generally. But what can happen is when I render, what happens is the overlay appears here on the wrong frame. And the reason that is because every single frame on this video has like a number associated with it, and Blender references this number and displays what it thinks the number is here in the preview window. And a lot of the time these numbers don't match up, and so you can be editing one frame and thinking this is how it's going to look when it renders, but no, it's offset by a frame, or no, her mouth is open already, or something like that. It can cause a lot of problems. And it's not a case of refreshing sequence to fix it. It's a case where you need to have this thing called a timecode to fix it. So Blender's going to do its own kind of number system here, and it's going to use that, and you're not going to have this issue if you insert a timecode. And so record run is what's recommended. Record run no gaps if it's heavily damaged your video. So if you get this from online, for example, and you don't know how it's made, or what programs they use to format it, generally always recommend do a timecode. If you don't know this stuff, always just use timecode, and you won't run into the issue that I mentioned with getting the wrong frame here, and that can be a major issue. Alrighty, so if you notice, we did our proxy, but what was supposed to happen is this is supposed to be super smooth, because it's easier for your computer to kind of process and display something that's only 25% of the pixels, but nothing's happening, right? So go up here, hit N, and then change here to 25%. And we go back and forth, super smooth now, great, awesome. So what happened here? We went from no proxy to 25%. So as you can see, there's a bit of a difference, and it even offsets itself a bit. And because I chose 25%, I can use all these settings here. And that's why I generally recommend just hit 25%, because you can use all the proxies you need here, whatever it may be. But we'll just so basically use your proxy that you're comfy with, and you have that on its default. And if you need to do any overlays or lip flaps or any kind of specific stuff, fine-tuned stuff, you'd switch back to no proxy here. and then you do it, and then you switch back to 25% to do your rough kind of cutting, and the main stuff you'll do at 25% here. So it's only, specific fine-tuning stuff you do, no proxy here. Alrighty, so from here we can easily, just render out a video of this existing one if we wanted to, and the proxy automatically goes away when you hit render, and it'll render the not proxied version. Okay, let's talk about some editing things you can do here. So cutting is the main one. So you select the strip, you just hit K for a soft cut. What a soft cut does, I'll just use G to bring this up, is it makes like a duplicate of the entire video. So if you remember my videos from there to there, so if I move this, and by moving this out again, you can use these, click on these arrow keys at the very end of the strip, and you can just click and drag them like you do with moving the entire strip, and open them as far as they can go. And so they went here, and it kind of just repeats the last frame. That's what actually happens with the actual video. It just repeats the last frame. And basically, because Blender is a top-down type of reader, it's gonna read what's on the top before it reads what's on the bottom. And the top is kind of overriding the bottom in this case. So if I hit H here to hide it, you can see I can see the bottom now. Just kind of move that a bit. To undo hide, it's Alt H. And any stuff that's hidden is not going to render. So it's an easy way to just put stuff off to the side that you might need in the future, and you can just hit H to hide it for later. So next is a hard cut. So generally hard cuts you want to use on scene changes. So we have black here, and we have a new scene here. So we do a hard cut, it's Shift K, and what happens is it cuts the scene completely, so it ends it basically at that cut. So this is really good for effect strips like speed control and all that stuff, because then I only have to deal with a certain frame. I can do another hard cut here, for example, then I just have this thing as like a separate kind of video, and then you can easily kind of reverse or do any kind of effects you want. So say I wanted to do like a lip flap for Yuzu here, but I have an audio that goes like from here to way over there. What I can do is actually just reverse a section of her talking here and kind of copy it back and forth. So I'm going to do another hard cut here, and I'm going to zoom in here, just kind of go here. So her lips are moving, great. And I think to myself, okay, I can just go back and forth, and that'll be fine for what I need. I could just duplicate this with Shift D, but it skips there. I don't want it to skip, right? I want it to be a bit more fluid. So if I could go back and forth, that would be great. So you go down to here, click on the strip you want to reverse here. Just go here and hit reverse. Okay, great. It's fairly fluid. If I did that on the original video, so I'm just going to undo, and let's bring that out here. So this is the original video again, remember, and if I hit reverse here, what's going to happen is the end is going to become the start. So I want to reverse just the section here. What's going to happen is I'm going to get a section about here in relation to how it compares to the center. So I'll just show you that here. The end will become the start, but a section here will become about here. Where is it? There we go. Yep, so about there. Just back and forth basically. So the next thing I'm going to show you is, okay, so generally if you do a project and you do a lot of hard cuts, you might lose a bit of the sequence or access to a bit of the video. So you can just reinsert your video at any time. And generally I recommend, if you're not dealing with too much footage, just to have a copy of your video off to the side here of the entire thing. So if I'm editing like a 20-minute video, I can just have a copy off to the side. And the proxy it just repeats itself on the video. So that's why you do proxies at the very start and timecodes at the very start, because if you do them later, it's going to mess everything up. And if you forgot to do them, you might have to just suck it up and finish your project without the timecode anyways. Because if you use a timecode with edited strips, it's gonna unsync them all and change the position of everything, and you don't want that. You have basic things like X and Y flip here. And there's little basic things like that you can do. We're not going to get into them too much, but going back to effect strips here. So we're going to do Shift A, and we're going to show you some effect strips you can use to make your work a bit more interesting. So the first one is color. It inserts a strip with a certain size here by default. And we can change the color by going to strip here. Change the lightness, make it a orange one. I'm going to duplicate that and change it to purple, and one more, change it to green. So just one thing to mention is that if I have a strip highlighted and I go up here and I work over here for a bit, it's still going to be highlighted even if I unclick it there by right clicking off to the side. So it's not even highlighted here, but this is still up. So if I edited this, it's still going to change it back here. So if I accidentally think I clicked here on a new strip, but I didn't, I might edit the old strip by accident. So just kind of keep that in mind. So if you have something up but you don't have something visibly highlighted, it's probably because you're editing something way over somewhere else. So color strips. So we're going to talk about this here, because Blender is a top-down kind of a read it has here. So to navigate this, instead of having everything over top of each other all the time, you can use these settings here. So these are familiar if you deal with image editors. It's the same kind of concept here. By default, we have cross here. So that means if I change the opacity, it's going to see what's underneath it type thing. So the other one is replace, in which case it's not going to read what's underneath it. It's just going to read this one strip here. And this is the same as blank space here. So it's going to be black, but it's just telling you that there is stuff here that is hidden, basically. So next one is we just do add, for example, and it just adds the orange color. Subtract takes away the orange color, or to some extent anyways. And the other ones you need to know are overdrop, if you want to do a watermark, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute, and alpha under and alpha over. So say I want this, let's just make this higher opacity here. If I want this video strip over top of the color strip, but I don't want to change the position, or I can't change the position of it, what you can do is go here and just hit alpha over, and you can, because this is set to overdrop, it's not going to be over, but if I put it back to cross here, actually sorry, you need to do alpha under here. By specifying one as under and one as over, you can actually have this strip displayed even though it's underneath the color strip here. So using these in combination and in tandem with each other, you can see what you need to see. So, what's being rendered is what you're seeing here, more or less, if you get rid of the proxy here. So just make sure what you're seeing here is what you want, basically. And to do that, you can use this stuff here. So I'm going to show you how to insert a watermark quickly here. And, oops. Alrighty. So when you insert an image, what happens is Blender kind of, transforms it. So it hits all the sides here. Because my space is 1080p, I need to make sure all my images are the same size or smaller. If they are bigger, Blender will cut them off in some way, and there's no workaround around this. You just need to make sure your inserted images are the same size or smaller. So I can move this around as an image strip here. It's just a solid strip because it's one image here. So I want to make this into a watermark, and because it's stretched out, to undo that I can hit image offset here, and that's the original image size, and that's what I want basically. So I can move it around with X and Y here, and to make it a watermark I want it to be over top of the other strips here, and I want to choose the overdrop setting here, but I want it to be a lot smaller, right? So I can use an effect strip, Shift A, transform, and what this does is it kind of repeats the original properties of this strip, but adds a bit more functionality to it. So it is kind of redundant in some ways, but it does add a few things we need in this case. So it's important to make sure you offset the strip in the original strip instead of doing it in this one. So because we did that, we're good. We can actually hide the original because it has all the properties in the transform strip that we need. And it's, you know, overwritten anyways. Here, so we want to scale, we'll do uniform scale, and we'll scale down. Because it kind of repeated itself, we need to specify overdrop once more here, because it repeated the default settings except for image offset, which it respected, and transferred to this image here, which is important to note because some things do get transferred. If I make some setting changes here, it's gonna make setting changes here automatically, but for the most part, any setting changes might not be transferred automatically. I need to redo them basically. So I can change the opacity, you know, make a good little watermark and just have it in the corner there. Pretty good. So if I repeated this, for example, I could easily just make 2 watermarks, and I don't need to worry about them conflicting even though they're one's above the other, because it's an overdrop, and I can put like multiple overdrops. So if I wanted an array of images here, I could easily do that. But just note, you do run out of space really quickly using that. There's a little workaround that you can do. Select what I need here, and so long as it's lining up, you can use something called Control G, a meta strip, and I have to reset the original setting here again in this case. And this is just a way to save some space if you need as many channels as possible, basically. There are some issues of that. Again, to undo a meta strip, it's Control G to make a meta strip, and you can make as many of them as you want, as you can see here. And to undo is Alt G here. And to access a meta strip, you just hit Tab while you have it select there, and you can make some edits to the original image here. The image properties in this case. You want to be careful though, because these have their own, meta strips have their own kind of rules that they play by here. So you might mess something up. So just make sure what it looks like outside of the meta strip is what you want. So this is what I want, for example, it looks that way, so it's okay. So we're just going to delete that there. So the next thing we're going to talk about is a few more effect strips here. Let's talk about, we talked about speed control and transform. Let's do text. This is a very easy way to add subtitles. It uses Blender's default text settings. You can kind of see it there. I want to make it a lot larger so you can see it easier. And it has this default text style. There's a way to use the 3D viewport to change the text style. So just if you want to go to default here, you can go back to the 3D viewport, and I can actually make a viewport here of the 3D viewport and edit it in this tab here, the video sequence window editor tab, or viewport, however you want to call it. And so I change the color, whatever. It's just a very easy way to put subtitles in, and the text is okay that it uses. The font style is okay as well. But when doing placement, it's very important you actually use no proxy, because what can happen, this isn't the best example, but it can really blow up in size, or be a lot smaller, or be a lot different than what you might think it would end up being. So it's just a little difference here, but in many cases it's going to be a huge difference. So I can use a text strap if I have a lot of stuff here. And I can edit it by just clicking here, typing stuff out, hitting enter to automatically update it type thing, and I can just mess around with that. Then I can use a transform layer if I want, and I'll just repeat overdrop here, and I can just scale it. Great, and it made a duplicate of it, so that's because I just mute the original underneath it and get what I want here. Sometimes it does that. It just functions differently with different kind of strips here. And I can rotate as well. The thing with rotate is, normally you want to rotate from the center of the axis of rotation. You can't set the axis of rotation, so Blender kind of sets it for you. So you get something weird like this sometimes. So even though I want to rotate it here, the axis is actually over here. So it's going to pivot around there, and it's not what you want usually, unfortunately. If you know how to use the 3D viewport, there's a workaround for this, but it is a bit of a hassle, and I'm not going to cover it today anyways, but it's just something to note, a limitation, if you will. So let's do one more thing here. Gamma cross, that's one you might need, or you're definitely going to need. So if I just mute the color strip here. So we have our video strip like this, and I put a color strip over top of it. And because that's set to alpha under still, I'm going to do alpha. I'm going to do overdrop just to simplify things. So basically, if I want to transition to the orange, so like this, as the video moves on, what I can do is if I select the first strip and then second strip I want to transition to, I can do gamma cross. Gamma cross is slowly. Let's do overdrop again. It is just very, very slowly doing the change there. So I'm just going to move that. And I'm actually going to cut here just to show you a bit better here. So we transition to orange here. It's good if you want to transition to blackness or black kind of thing. So the other one you can use is cross. And it does like the same thing, more or less. I was taught to do cross for if you have them side by side here. Oops. What can happen is if you get something red like this and you move something, if you move it, if I try and place this here and there's not enough space, it's gonna pretty much always go to one end or the other of my entire sequence. So it could have gone to that end. What I would need to do is make space, I could click and drop it like, just drop it here for a second. So if I wanted it here, I can easily just click and drop it here. Even though it's red here, you can't really see it. I can just drop it and it'll automatically snap to where it can go. If I didn't have space though, what I can do is I hit G and then G again, and you'll see it says expand to fit there on, and I can just do that. I'm just going to move everything over basically. You want to be careful with this because if you have stuff over top, and I did that, so I'll just do it again. So it has a unique, if I want to respect this relationship where it's the text is here and the text is here, if I do this, it doesn't respect it, right? So I don't have my text on these frames anymore. So it's an easy way to mess things up if you're not careful. So I suggest, because if I had stuff like next to this, like, here, it's going to push everything down, right? So everything's offset now. So the way to get around that is just make sure there's nothing really, make sure there's nothing on the cross points here. So here and here, make sure there's nothing over top there. If need be, you can, just move stuff out of the way and move it back afterwards. But yeah, so cross, we'll just do that quickly. It's the same, it does the same thing as gamma blurs. I don't really understand. So I can just move the arrow key here. It's gonna transition to the orange, like so. So to do a gamma cross, you just need to cross over at least one frame here in order for it to function. And the order is important. So if I did color strip to, the original strip here, gamma cross, it's going to do color first, and it's going to fade out, and then it's going to go straight to color when it's done. So color first, fade out, then color when it's done, because the gamma cross strip is done basically. Then you have stuff like wipe, very good for basic kind of transitioning. You want to do like the Star Wars thing, you can go down here and iris, and I can add a bit of blur here, like do in, that you want out generally with that effect, the Star Wars effect anyways. Or yeah, not the best example, but you get the idea. If this was another scene, for example, again, not the best idea, but there. So wipe, and that's one thing I'm just going to teach you here. If I wanted this wipe to apply to these two strips, what I can do is I can either take this one and put it here, so I can delete this one, or if I want to duplicate, I can do Shift D, just move it up, and then I can do click the strip that you want the effect to move to, then click the effect strip you want, then hit the R key. And sorry, I can't do that because I actually have it. I need to respect the original here. Right. So what I did was I clicked here, and then on that one, then I hit R. And if I move this up, I'll have the effect move there. Generally, I'll just show you a very basic one. If I want transform here, I do transform. I do like zoomed in really strong here. If I want to move that to here, I would just click the effect I want it moved, then click the effect, hit R, and it'll just move it like so. And again, I duplicate and make a new one if I don't want it to move from here. If I want to duplicate one to move there. Alrighty, so and I'm going to show you how to do. Let's do a color strip, a black one. So there's a couple ways to fade to black here. If I want to make my fade to black end about here, for example. Oops, let's hit E in the timeline again. And I want to fade to black, for example. Alt H to unmute it again. So basically the effect I want is this, the opacity to change from 0 to 1. So the way I can do that is when I'm, play the animation, I can set a keyframe. So I want to start at 0, so I hit, change it to 0, then I hit I here. And it goes, that's yellow color there, which is important. That's where the keyframe is. And I want it to end about here. So I hit I again, and then I can change what I want it to be at this point. So, because I want it to be 1, but if I, move it around, it doesn't actually respect it because I need to hit I whenever I make an input value change again. So I just hit I again when it's set to 1. And if I move around the timeline, ta-da! So the other method was using a game across, like I showed you before, but you can also use keyframes for this in this case. So I'm going to show you one other, showing you with keyframes here. So to move to keyframes, you can use these buttons here to move to where your keyframes are. And you can delete specific keyframes, or I can delete all my keyframes. And if I do a text strip here, I'm going to show you something. Let's do a transform layer here. So usually you want to use keyframes on transformations here. So say I want to move in and out, and I'm going to show you how to do this extra kind of modification with the graph editor here. So usually if I use the graph editor, I just insert a couple keyframes if I want to change the scale in a certain way. And I could do keyframes for anything here, but I'm just going to do it for scale just to simplify here. So I have some keyframes there, great. I'm going to change properties to graph editor here, back to the original what it was. And so what we want to do is highlight the strip we want to work with, go to the graph editor for cursor and I hit home, and it's going to zoom in to the keyframes of that strip. And I can, use my scroll wheel to zoom in and out, pan it with my middle mouse button, etc. And it's telling me it's the scale X transform here, which is just corresponding to this here, the scale here. So I could play this sequence here. So what I want to do is just set the Bezier by default, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I can move these around here. And what's going to happen is because up is a higher scale, it's going to zoom in here. The text anyways. I'm just going to move this up so it's a bit easier to see. And we'll get rid of the original. So again, I can just click here again and bring it up here. So it's zooming in, zooming out, and then zooming out again, and then zooming in again. Yeah, so if I wanted to change these, you can use a box select to highlight whatever keyframes I want. This is a keyframe, that's a keyframe, that's a keyframe. Make a new keyframe, I can do control left click at any point. I can just keep making a ton of them if I want to. I can do like whatever effects I want, right? And I could do multiple keyframes and more things. And so if I did a keyframe here, all I have to do is specify by clicking here if I want to change that, for example, or if I want to change here. And I can use the A command to select everything. Then I can use something like, I'm just going to delete this one, but I just clicked it and hit X and then delete. So I can use A to select all these keyframes, and I can use the S command to scale. And I can scale the X value by hitting X, so it'll make it kind of condensed. So it's a faster sequence, because remember the bottom axis is the amount of frames it covers. And if I do Y, it makes it higher scaling, basically, all the way down to a scale of 0, which would be, I think, nothing. Yep. Yeah, so that's the basics of, use undo again to put it back. And say I want to change the interpolation type, so it's Bezier right now, right? So it's, you have a fair bit of, you know, room to play with Bezier, but I'm actually somewhere where the strip doesn't cover, so I'm not getting anything. So I can just move that there, go back to home, and because I'm at 0 here, I'm not going to see anything. So I can change these two here to a straight line pretty easily by going to key, interpolation, linear. So it's more consistent. Each frame moves a certain rate basically with linear. Linear is good if you only have a certain, you know, small number of frames to deal with to put an effect on. Otherwise, I just use Bezier because Bezier has a bit more, you know, charisma, a bit more finesse to it. It's very slow at the start, and it's, you know, fast in the middle, then slow at the end. Alright, so that's basically keyframes for the most part. There's a lot of functionality you can get into there. I'm actually going to bring this up, do a properties tab again. So the other thing I want to talk about is we're just going to cover 2 more things here. And the first one I should have covered earlier, but user preferences. If you go to File, which is your Info tab again, and go to User Preferences here. This is important to set up very early on before you do any kind of major project anyways. So go to Editing, and the global undo is a number of undo steps. So I could increase this if I wanted to. I haven't, you know, done that before, but it's supposed to use up more memory. I put it to 0 just to see if it had any performance benefits. It doesn't in my case anyways. So I just keep it 32, or consider moving it up if you want. So here we have interpolation set to Bezier by default. So if I want it linear by default, I can just, you know, have it here instead of doing it, you know, changing it bit by bit all the time. And go to inputs and add-ons. We won't cover that. Themes, file. This is really important. I suggest you mimic my settings for the autosave. So basically I click here and it allows it to autosave my project every 2 minutes basically. And it's just a single autosave that it keeps overwriting every 2 minutes. Okay, so just keep note of that because that's important. So what you want to do is set a temp folder for where your autosave or where your saves save basically. And you want to be able to access this folder without having to bring up Blender and find where it is again. So I have mine set to my desktop in a specific folder here. And if Blender crashes, and Blender does crash a lot for crazy things, you want to go to this folder first thing. Okay, so this is my recovery folder here. My current project here is being worked on. It's, you know, just a minute or two. It's pretty much right on the same time that is right now. It basically autosaves when you quit. You should, you know, save before you quit if you need to save before you quit. But it'll autosave automatically, just, you know, just to note. Just note that. And your normal autosave every 2 minutes is the name of the folder, and you can just check by the time that's modified here. So if Blender did crash and I did a lot of work, like 4 hours, and I forgot to save along the way, what I do is I come to this folder first and foremost, and I just click here and I open the file from 2 minutes ago. And I check the file, make sure it's okay, and if it's okay, I just overwrite the existing project file. So I just save this as the existing project file, wherever it may be stored basically. And you'll be good. If you open Blender, right after a crash and you spend 2 minutes trying to figure out where stuff is and what I need to press, you're actually going to overwrite your last autosave from, you know, where it's saved right before the crash. And you don't want to do that because that's an easy way to lose X many hours of work, and that's happened to me before. So don't make that mistake. Always go to the temp folder if it crashes and you need to restore or recover something. So we went to system here. The sound here is your playback, and we're going to talk about that right after this. But what you need to know is that these, you know, is how it sounds when you play it in the timeline here. But these are not respected when it renders. So just note that, because, you know, when you do something like a video editor, you want to get what you see is what you get. And you'll get that for the, you know, the visual frames if you have a, you know, timecode set up properly. But with the audio, it's a different story. And yeah, so if you want to render with your GPU, it might be a bit faster. In my case, it's not, but it is a bit quieter. So you can click here and enable this. And the only other thing is, that's pretty much it I want to talk about here. So you can just save your settings, and these will, you know, override the existing one. There's a way to restore default factory settings. I don't remember the command, but you can look it up fairly easily. Just Google restore factory settings Blender. And you do it in the, we can do it anywhere actually, but just a quick command. Yeah, so we're gonna X out of that. So the big thing, we talked about number of channels, we talked about time codes, and we're gonna talk about the last thing here, and we're gonna end. And the last thing is the big thing, that's the audio. So if I click my audio strip here, generally I'm just gonna zoom this in a bit. Okay, so what you want to do generally is draw the waveform when you're dealing with an audio strip. So the issues are as follows. You can see, if you know a bit about audio, this is a stereo track. It doesn't really show it, you know, in the way you want, but from the middle to the top is your range you can have. And if the waveform is loud enough or big enough that it hits the top, it's going to clip, basically. And it's going to sound distorted and sound really bad. And you want to avoid clipping at pretty much all costs, unless you like the sound of the clipping. So sometimes that can be good for, you know, distorted kind of sounds if you need those of it. Pretty much you want to avoid it. So as you can see here, a straight line would be no sound. So any modification going up is a bit of sound. So we're not clipping at all here, which is great. We have a few peaks here that are kind of close, so we need to kind of pay attention to that. So if I move from the volume here, I can go down from 0 to 100, basically. This is where the problems start. So if I go from 1 to 0, I'm going to be okay, because I'm basically just decreasing this waveform. And 0 would be mute, so there'd be no sound whatsoever. The 1 is always going to be the size of the waveform when it was input into Blender. So this could be a huge waveform, right? But 1 is just going to be the, you know, the default size of when it was input. So every, you know, sound file is going to be a bit different, you know. So generally you kind of muck around with them in Audacity, get them to the size you want, make sure it's not clipping there. Then you can import them into Blender here, and they'll be the same size as at the 1 volume. So you're safe if you want to go from 0 to 1 here. If you want to go up though, you risk clipping. And so, for example here, because this is very low, I could go up to 10 probably and not have any issues. But if I went to 10, I can only go 10 for, if I went to 10 for the entire strip, this would definitely clip. So what I generally recommend is just using volumes from like 0 to 2 usually, and you'll be safe in many cases for, like, you know, not for what you generally need for like YouTube, whatever. You'll be generally safe just for as a beginner type thing. So if my entire project is from 0 to 2 in volume, I'll generally be okay. I'll avoid clipping. The main problem is that playback here will not, you know, show you if it's clipping. So based on how you have your volume set up, I could turn my volume way down here, and 100 here would sound the same as, 1 or 2, depending on my volume settings. So it sounds the exact same to me here. And I go back to 2, it's going to be really quiet because my volume's different, my volume is turned down. There's a few workarounds for this. One is you amplify all of your waveforms to their maximum in Audacity by just highlighting them, going to Effect and Amplify, and using the default maximum amplification displays there before clipping. And if you do that, you're always going to have maximum waveforms, and you just modify them from 1 to 0 basically. And it kind of functions as a percent in this case. It's probably logarithm, but for the most part 0.5 is 50% volume decrease of the original 1 here, and 0 is 0. So that's an easy way to get around this issue. Well, I say easy, but it is a bit of work. But generally, before you input something into Blender, you want to look at it with something like Audacity. Just make sure there's no issues, and yeah, and it's not that hard to amplify it. So that's one way to get around the issue. The other thing you can do, like I said, just keep your volumes 0 to 2 basically, and be mindful of the waveform. So check your waveform, and just from playing around with things, you kind of know where it's going to clip in some cases. I'll be fine up to 10 for this stuff, and kind of get a bit risky about here, but then this is definitely going to clip here. You just know that from trial and error in my case anyways. Pitch, don't play with this because it does really screwy stuff, or it's going to play something that's maybe not. It's going to play something where there isn't supposed to be something here sometimes. And again, you can use the same, audio strips are the same as video strips. You can modify them the exact same way, but you can't really use effect strips on them. You can't reverse the audio in here. You have to use Audacity or something else to reverse audio. It's very limited in what you can do in terms of audio effects here. But I mean, it's bare bones. And the other thing to mention is, this is kind of important, if I have multiple strips here and I want to mix these down, it may sound okay, it doesn't sound awesome here, but sometimes you can get things that sound really good in the VSE playback, but when I mix down, you're going to get something that's a very amplified version. If I did this in Audacity, it would more or less kind of respect the amplification of the waves here. If I do it in Blender though, it's going to do something different than Audacity. It's just going to amplify stuff. That's a very easy way to get to the clipping point here, which you don't want. So Blender mixes stuff down different than Audacity, and generally, in my opinion, you want how Audacity mixes stuff down, and Audacity is meant for mixing down. It's very powerful. Blender has a placeholder system. It's the way to see it. It can work sometimes for simple stuff, but you're going to run into issues a lot of the time. Okay, so hopefully you understand that to some degree. It gets a bit more complicated because, like I said, what you hear here is not what you hear on output. And if you do a huge project like I did, I don't really want to show you that right now, it's kind of embarrassing. But yeah, if I have tons of audio strips like this, the best thing to do is to mute them, except for one, and you just render the strips. If I render the strips from like this, what would happen if I use a mix down here is it'll make an audio strip from the start to the end. So even though there's no audio here, it's going to make a strip of that size. And this is a very easy way to line things up in Audacity, because the only reason you don't use Audacity for all of this is because you need to line it up with video here, right? So you need this kind of functionality of strips and be able to move them around and all that stuff. So if I mix down each strip one by one, setting the project space and having them in position, I can just get a bunch of tracks here in Audacity, each for one of these. So I'd do it again for this one, mix down, do it again for that one, mix down, again for that one, mix down, etc. And yeah, this is a good way to mix, to transfer the Audacity and to mix them. without running into issues of clipping or weird stuff happening, because you're not going to get the sound that you think when you mix stuff here. You're going to get a placeholder system that generally is not what you want. But if you're kind of lazy like me, and it is a lot of work to do that with Audacity, and it's important to know this though, your options. There are some other options which I'm going to be looking into, like third-party programs. I can line other stuff up like Audacity type programs and export to a lot easier to mix down and whatnot, but I haven't really learned that yet, and hopefully I will be able to learn it. But yeah, for the most part, just be very, very cautious of audio here. So again, what you hear in this space on playback is not what you're going to get when you render. Okay, and to know what you get when you render, you should check your imported audio file wherever it is, because all these strips are referencing the original, right? So my original video file, here, is referencing that, and so I can just go to the video file and play it, open it with Audacity, see how it's how it actually sounds at one volume, and just compare it to what I hear here. Another option you have is just to record using something like Audacity, the playback. And if you do that, the only issue you really have is the volume might be a bit, up and down in places, and it might not be lined up. But you can always just export this, the method I said, and then use that as a way to line up with something here, so I can just move it to where it, sounds like it overlaps. But you need to be careful of that method, because the volume can be up and down a lot to the extent that you might not think. So I might have a small waveform and then a huge waveform where it sounds consistent, but it's not. So those are your options when doing audio with Blender. The ideal is just to input a single strip, have it set to 1, already formatted, and you can just render down using the audio encoding settings here. But even if you do that, you might run into issues again. This is not reliable. Okay, if I do keyframes, you can do keyframes on audio as well if I want to fade in and fade out. And there is an issue, I've had a bug where keyframes are not respected properly if I have a huge project. So that's something you need to watch out for. If you did make the mistake of, having the wrong volume, and you have like a huge project with everything at the wrong volume, you don't know how to fix it necessarily, you can change the master volume here down. So this is play like it'll divide all the volumes by like 10 if I set it to 1.1 in this case. The thing with that is that the mixdown does not have that volume control. As a workaround, you can make a new scene here. Let's click here, new, and go to Shift A, scene, and that'll insert the scene from before, and it has a master volume switch here. Down here you can change, and that'll be respected when I mix down here. If I'm mixing down at too high of a volume, for example, and if I need to change it. The thing with this though is another issue, where the very last audio strip gets cut off, so you need to put like an extra audio strip just to make sure it doesn't get cut off. And yeah, these are all workarounds, right? So you're going to run into issues with audio at some point probably. The ideal is just one strip, but even then it might sound very bad. So the ideal, or the safest way, is even if I have a single strip here, to mix down like so, set accuracy to 1, I can choose, if I know the native settings, I can just choose those again. And then if I want to change the container or the format or whatever, it's best to use Audacity itself to do that. But if I need to mix down, I do recommend WAV F32, because you're combining two things, right? So the combined file, you want as much data as possible to be retained, even if you're dealing with, two, S16 files or whatever. And because my settings for file settings here were set to default to be 32-bit float, this is what I'm hearing here, right? I don't recommend using this in general unless you want to do like a lossy AAC copy for like YouTube and you have like a single strip, in which case, sure, we'll go for it. It's combines the audio and the video. Otherwise, I would use FFmpeg or some other third-party program to combine the audio and the video. And again, I'll put a link to how you do that. So always kind of normalize your audio strips so they're either super high or right in the middle before you input them in the blender here. Okay, that's everything I want to cover.